In today's video, we're going to talk about what would happen if Russia deliberately took out a nuclear power plant. Would it be Chernobyl 2.0? Also, not only how would it affect the immediate surroundings, but how would it affect the world as a whole? Be sure to stick around to the end because the reach of this will be far and wide, possibly for generations. Before we get into today's video, let us know in the comments below what would you do if there was a nuclear disaster where you live? How do you think it would affect you? If you like content like this, leave a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us out a lot. Russia's attack on Ukraine has resulted in the occupation of Europe's largest nuclear power station, the Zaporizhzhia plant in Ukraine. Russia launched its first invasion on Ukraine on February 24th, and on March 4th, Russian forces captured the nuclear power plant. After bombarding the facility with artillery and causing a fire, Russian troops occupied it and stationed personnel and munitions there, in effect, using the nuclear reactors as a shield for their offensive operations. As the war drags for almost a year now, concern for the safety of the facility has grown. The Ukrainian staff reports harassment and abuse by Russian forces, and the facility has been shelled, inflicting minor damages in the electrical lines vital to the reactor's cooling systems. Russia is effectively using the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as a pre-positioned nuclear weapon to threaten and intimidate not only Ukrainians but millions of Europeans across a dozen countries. This situation triggered the first real-world case of a crisis that many people not only in Europe but the world as a whole feared for decades: a threat of radiological disaster from a wartime invasion on an operating nuclear power plant. In this video, we are going to discuss the risks and likelihood of this happening. Is it going to be a new Chernobyl? How will the world respond? We're going to tackle the step-by-step scenario if Russia decides to take out a nuclear power plant in Ukraine and the effects of this catastrophe not only in Europe but the whole world. Russia finally hits the nuclear power plant. Power plants are common targets in modern conflict because destroying them cripples the country's ability to carry on fighting. But nuclear reactors are not like other energy sources. They contain enormous amounts of radioactive material which can be released in any number of ways. Aerial bombing or artillery fire, for example, could break a reactor's containment building or sever vital coolant lines that keep its core stable. So too could a cyber attack that interrupts plant operations, as would a disruption of off-site power that nuclear plants rely on to keep functioning. A direct missile attack on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant would result in much more radiation being released into the environment. The type of uranium power plants used to produce power is different from enriched uranium used in nuclear weapons, so the power plant would in no way add to the overall explosive power of the warhead. However, when the blast takes place, the uranium inside the power plant would vaporize and increase the radioactivity of the overall blast. The blast would vaporize the entire plant, and the immediate area around the plant would become a crater. The blast shockwave, fireball, and nuclear fallout would destroy the environment for many miles depending on how powerful the missile is. Nuclear meltdown. Ukraine has 15 functional nuclear reactors which together supplied 51% of its electricity in 2022. Kiev has relied on nuclear power to avoid energy dependence on Russia, which controls some of the world's largest oil and gas reserves. When reactor cores melt as a result of a missile attack from Russia, explosive gases or belching radioactive debris would exit the containment structure. Once in the atmosphere, the effluents would settle over thousands of miles, dumping light but very toxic radioactive elements on urban and rural landscapes. Spent nuclear fuel could cause further devastation if storage pools were set afire. The health consequences of such fallout would depend on the population exposed and the toxicity of the radioactive elements. The UN Chernobyl Forum estimated that the 1986 Ukraine accident would inflict 5,000 excess cancer deaths over 50 years, though some environmental groups think that figure grossly understates the likely toll. Indeed, thousands of thyroid cancers emerged in the years immediately following the accident. Radioactive waste could hit Germany and surrounding countries. Russia's Ministry of Defense warned Thursday that if an accident occurs at the nuclear power plant it is occupying in southern Ukraine, radioactive material would cover Germany, Poland, and Slovakia. Several countries in Europe could be at risk if there was an accident. It is a terrifying prospect in Europe, especially in Ukraine, which still lives with the scars of the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, which remains the world's worst nuclear accident, and one which led to radioactive material spreading across Europe. Probably more than any country in the world, Ukraine is aware of the consequences of an explosion and fire at a nuclear power plant. Is it going to be the new Chernobyl? The Chernobyl disaster still looms large in the collective memories of Ukrainians and the world. The explosion of its number 4 reactor displaced 200,000 people in what was then the Soviet Union, left 93,000 square miles of land uninhabitable, and has had myriad consequences for people across the region and across generations. Zaporizhzhia's reactors, however, are different to those that were in Chernobyl, but that nonetheless an accident at the plant could have significant consequences for Ukraine. Zaporizhzhia uses enriched uranium. Its current reactors are not moderated by graphite but by water, which means that they are safer and will not burn in the way of Chernobyl. Modern reactors in Ukraine, like in Zaporizhzhia, are also surrounded by a secondary containment system, a hard concrete shell designed to withstand explosions and a crashed airplane. However, it is not yet clear as to how effective they would be against attacks, as the thickness of the containment wall in this design of the reactor is traditionally 2 meters thick. The radioactive material at Zaporizhzhia is stored in the spent fuel pools, where used fuel is kept underwater to cool and to allow radiation levels to fall before being moved to a final store. If coolant is lost from the ponds, either by a direct hit that breaches containment structures or by a meltdown of the core due to losses of power, the stored fuel will begin to heat up. If the temperature rises above 900 degrees Celsius, the cladding around the zirconium cladding will ignite, leading to the spreading of radioactive material. While any release of radioactive isotopes could be catastrophic for the surrounding areas, because of the type of reactors at Zaporizhzhia, the impact would likely be nowhere near as severe as the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, and more likely be similar in scale to the 2011 Fukushima nuclear crisis. How will the world respond? Losing on the battlefield, Russian President Vladimir Putin has resorted to implied threats of nuclear weapons use in his war of choice in Ukraine. The United States, Group of 7 nations, NATO, the European Union, and others have sent clear messages on the severe consequences Russia will face if it indeed attacks a nuclear plant or uses any type of nuclear weapon against Ukraine. Impose a full economic, financial, and trade embargo. Turning Russia into Iran or North Korea economically would be the moral and logistical starting point for any Russian use of a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. The G7 and EU countries have imposed extraordinary sanctions thus far over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but in large part they have also been measured in their steps to avoid negative spillover to the global economy. Sanctions on this level will have a significant negative impact on the global economy. Seize Russian state assets. Within days of Putin's February 24th attack on Ukraine, G7 countries locked down over $300 billion of Russian foreign exchange reserves held in their countries. That effective freeze does not, however, allow the use of those funds for any purpose. Remove Russia from international organizations. Although Russia was kicked out of the G8, thus making it the G7 back in 2014, it remains a party to a member of international organizations. Should Russia use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, its participation in other international organizations should be reviewed. The first place to begin curtailing Moscow's participation should be in economically focused organizations, including the Group of 20 and international financial institutions such as the World Bank and International Monetary Fund, and perhaps even the World Trade Organization. There's no military gain from a nuclear accident. Both armies are equally vulnerable to radiation and contamination, and so are innocent civilians. A nuclear mishap could leave the land uninhabitable for generations. The United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has called for a demilitarized zone, and the United States and other Group of 7 nations have insisted Russia return the plant to Ukrainian control, as Ukraine has also demanded. However, Russia has rejected the proposal. Thank you for watching our latest video. Why not check out one of our other videos on screen now?